Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another one of my videos. Today we're going to review a presentation by Mr. John Pugliano, who spoke at the Survival Podcast yearly workshop about the implications of relocating, as well as he's going to go over his view of the current trends in the stock market. Now, I got to see John give this presentation at the workshop, which is a wonderful event that I highly recommend people get out and attend if you're available to travel in the November timeframe and you have varied interest in life. There's all kinds of people that show up, and it always ends up being a wonderful time, a great host, and just you meet a tremendous amount of amazing folks there. So with that, let's get the video started. Not sure if you know this or not, but there's actually another great website for videos that doesn't deal with a lot of the censorship that you deal with on YouTube. If you're interested, and as a favor to me, please go over to odyssey.com and subscribe to my channel there as well. You'll find the link in the description below. Thanks.
Nobody's gonna stand in my way. Give it up, son, I'm doing this my way.
Nicole, thanks for the introduction. Jack, thanks for having me back. Always appreciate it. So I'm going to talk about, as we mentioned, strategic profit or strategic relocation for profit. If you're not interested in moving, that's okay, because this is a whole lot more about profit than it is about the relocation part. So the reason I did this with this particular topic is I wanted to cover, along with the theme, not only the strategic relocation part of it, but really to hit on the economic system, where I think future jobs and things are going to go. We'll touch on a really brief stock market review as well, because I love money. But the real thing I want to hammer away here, and I think this meshes nicely with Chris's presentation. We didn't collaborate, but we've collaborated through life, so it kind of worked out that way anyways. But you know, he talked a lot about, he ended up with freedom, right? That was the bottom line. That was what freedom was for him. And I'm going to go through some things, especially when I talk about the economic situation and everything. This is all just my opinion, but I think I have a pretty informed opinion. And I want to tell you, because the prepper community tends to be so, we're paranoid, we worry about a lot of things. We are living in the best times in the history of humanity, and they're going to get better. And they're going to get worse for a lot of other people. But if you're prepared and you know how to manage your money and you have talents and abilities, you can have an awesome life and in this country. So as I talk about strategic relocation, we're not leaving the borders of the United States in my presentation. Let's talk about the overall economic system. If you study traditional economics, they generally talk about four areas that are sources of wealth, okay? And if you've listened to my podcast, you know I have 10 wealth building principles. The third principle is that production is the source of wealth. Okay? That's the bottom line, right? It's not winning the lottery. It's not doing anything, getting rich quick overnight. It's all about being productive and then learning how to take that money and make it more productive and to be a slave for you. And so it all comes down to production. But if you look at, again, classical economics, we're looking at four areas, and it's really those first three that the academics and people really focus on. Karl Marx, talked a lot about capitalism, the evils of capitalism. You can see that's one of them up there. But these sources are, you have the land, and the land being, you farm it, you do extraction mining, you rent it out for other sources, but that's where the wealth from the land comes. And then labor is the human effort that we put into things. Capital isn't so much the money, it's the concept of what you do with that money. So you take, in Karl Marx's idea of capitalism, all the evil, wealthy people, had the money to buy the capital equipment, and then they could enslave the poor humans and turn that into profits for themselves. There's truth to that, but there's also a lot of fallacies to that, because the bottom line is that capital is how we all get rich. It doesn't matter if you're an oligarch or not. We are all going to get rich through that capital investment when we're putting it into viable producer products. I'm going to get into that in a minute. And then the entrepreneurship is what is always ignored, And that's how all of us can get wealthy, right? It's how Elon Musk and those guys get wealthy, but it's also how all of us can get wealthy. I'm not going to dwell a lot on entrepreneurship in this presentation because I know most people still have a job. So as I talk about this, I'm going to talk more about just working for somebody or working at jobs. But whether you work for someone or not, you're still an entrepreneur of your own life. And that's where the source of the wealth is. So capital, right? The whole capitalism, how evil it is. I think capital, just put that out of your mind. Think of technology. Capital means technology. When my grandfathers made a living, they worked hard, right? They worked harder than I ever worked a day of my life. Those guys were poor. They were poor because they didn't have a capital, to invest in things. They were coal miners and they were building railroads, but they didn't even have big equipment to do it in those days. They had to work, just with the strength of their arms and their back. And that's why they were poor. They worked hard, but they were poor. If we can adequately apply our capital, no matter what we're in, we can become richer and wealthier because that capital works for us. Okay, so when you think about capital, you're thinking about technology, and this is really the source of where all my optimism comes from. Why I'm optimistic about the future is that technology does two things, and they're incredible things. The first one is, as we all think about it, it does increase human productivity. That's how it can make us all wealthier. The other thing that people forget or don't know is that number 2 up there is big. That's why I have it in bold letters. Capital, just think about the technology. It lowers the variable cost. Okay? That's the secret to the future. That's why this system, as bad as it may get politically and other problems, that this system is not collapsing, in my opinion. I think the economy is going to keep moving along. It's going to be ups and downs and good and bad for certain people, but the economy itself is not going to totally ever collapse because technology lowers variable costs. And what that means is, when you make profits, your profits are derived from a simple equation. You have your revenues, which is your sales, and you subtract from that your costs. That's how you get your profit. The way the costs work out is that costs are combining of two things. There's fixed cost and there's variable cost. And remember, I said technology lowers variable cost. Now, I'm going to put in a shameless plug for my book because I love capital, right? I'm going to tell you about my book. I wrote it, 2016 is when I wrote it. It's a long time ago. It was about robots. It is still, in fact, more relevant today than it was back when I wrote it. We saw how COVID has come in. We went to more work from home, more robotics, more automation. Those trends, as Jack has always said, COVID killed the dying, right? He wasn't talking about people. He was talking about the dying technologies. That's what I wrote that book about, is how we are moving to more of a digital world. COVID sped that along, but it was a trend all along. It's not going to go away. And the reason I'm optimistic about the future is that variable cost. If you go out and buy my book, a lot of people say, why don't I bring my books and autograph and all that? It's not because I hate money. I'll tell you why I don't do that. Well, I'm lazy. I don't want to carry my books. But besides that, every printed book I sell, my variable cost goes up, right? As with everything. Anything that you have an analog, a physical thing, the more that you sell, the more your variable cost goes up. You have the fixed cost it took to create that. In my case, the book, the time and effort I had to put in producing the book. That's my fixed cost. And then the variable cost is, it's got to be printed, it's got to be mailed. For it to be printed, it had to cut down trees, and you had to use ink, from chemicals. All these factors had to come together as a variable cost to print that book. And whether I sell one of them or a million of them, that next one, my incremental costs always go up, and those variable costs are taken away from my profit. Now, if you buy this in a digital format like Kindle, those variable costs are next to none. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, there are none. I have no cost there. It's just freely distributed. So the only thing that's taken out of my profit is that fixed cost that I had to create the book with. So technology always reduces the variable costs. And when the variable costs go down, your profit goes up. And that's the bottom line on why I look at the future as being better than it is today, because technology is increasing at a faster rate than it ever has, and profits are going to keep continuing to go up. So as bad as the politicians debase the money, spend, go into debt, all those kind of things, that's going to be bad. But especially if you're entrepreneurial, you can figure out a way to have more profits. Okay? This all comes down to an analog world and a digital world, right? The world is moving more towards digitization. That's more efficient. It reduces variable costs. So, technology is deflationary. That's why Federal Reserve has over $8 trillion on their balance sheet right now, right? I can remember when Ronald Reagan was running for president, we weren't even at $1 trillion of debt back then. We weren't even close to it, okay? We're at $8 trillion now and the system hasn't failed. 8 trillion just on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, 22, 21 trillion of overall debt. The system hasn't failed because technology has more than made up for those losses. Okay, so that's why you want to focus on technology and you as individuals building that into your life so you can personally make more profit. Digital is always cheaper than the physical world because moving electrons, that's what digital is, right? It's really just moving an electron. Electron has no mass. It has a charge, but no weight. And so an electron is always going to be cheaper to move than anything in the physical world, any element. You're moving copper in an electric car or using coal to generate electricity. All the things you're going to do, those are elements. It's always cheaper to move the electrons. That's why you look at the big, huge companies today. They all are more profitable and larger than the old companies. If you're a boomer, than the old companies you can think about in the old days. Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, they're all, Google, they're all much more profitable than General Electric or General Motors or, all the old time U.S. Steel, all those old companies were. Those old companies were elements and they were analog. Digital is how you make more money faster. But the thing to remember is, and this is why petroleum and these other resources are not going away, in order to move electrons, you need these elements, right? You need the digital world. Today we're still burning coal and natural gas, petroleum products. Maybe someday we won't. It's not all going to come from renewables. It'll still be using elements someday in the form of uranium, right? But we're still going to need some kind of elements to move those electrons. So those are still investable. The other thing to remember is that these elements, even as they become scarcer, they also become cheaper, though, because we're using technology to mine them or to acquire them or to control them. And again, that's why, even though there's been all this debasement of our money, and as expensive as gasoline seems to be when you go out to fill up your tank today, in terms of hours that you work to fill up your gas tank, it's still cheaper than what my grandfather had to do, right? And he was in a coal mine, so he had to work a lot harder to fill up his gas tank than what we have to today. This is one of my favorite charts of all-time history. I keep this on my wall next to my picture of my family in my office. It reminds me every day. I've showed this before, and I'm going to show it when I come back next year. This is the production of oil. And I'm a boomer, right? So I'm the tail end of the baby boomers. I know, as young and handsome as I look, you wouldn't know it. But I was born back here in 1961. All my life, I heard about how oil production was declining. This is oil production in the United States. So from the early days when we found oil till about 1970, 71, we kept producing more and more oil in this country. But around 1970, 71, it all fell apart and we produced less oil every year. If you lived through the OPEC oil embargo and the inflation, all that stuff in the 70s, that was because we went on the other end of that peak. This was peak oil. In the old days, we used to call this peak oil, meant peak production of oil. Today, we talk about peak oil of not needing. It's going to be peak supply. We don't need the oil anymore. But if you lived along this curve, and this was a real curve, there's a lot of things to be worried about back then, from nuclear proliferation to acid rain, all these problems. But man, this was the killer because we were running out of oil. What were we going to do? Well, here we are today, and we've come off that peak only because of supply, right? We have plenty of oil on the ground. It's just that we're not flying airplanes internationally and other stuff. So for right now, we're off of that. But that's going to go back up to over 13 million barrels a day. Now back here, 1978, if you'd have said the U.S. is going to produce 13 million barrels of oil a day and be either the lowest cost producer in the world or close to it, people would have thought you were insane, okay? Certifiably insane to say that back here. But it happened, okay? And it happened for one reason. We talk about in the media about fracking and all this different stuff. Yeah, that's all part of it. But the bottom line is it's technology. Because these first 100 years of oil, pretty much we drilled holes, and if we didn't find oil, they drilled another hole next to it. Right? They just kept looking, drilling holes. Had to go out in the ocean and drill holes out there. We started applying technology, big data, horizontal drilling, robotics, all these things that we have in technology today. That all got applied in a big way around 2006. And so from then on up, the economy grew, and the best part of the 8 years of Obama's economy was right there, production of oil. And the reason this is my favorite chart is because it had nothing to do with anything other than technology. Technology reduced the variable cost of finding oil, something we were in a hopeless situation for. And so when I look at all the problems facing us, rising costs of healthcare, cleaning up the polluted world, agriculture, here I'm talking about big ag, but also little ag, we'll talk about that in a minute. But agriculture, education, being freer from government, reshoring of manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Everything you can think of, you can apply that same chart to. When technology is applied to these things, it reduces the variable costs. In a lot of cases, it decentralizes it. In the case of like healthcare, it's going to put, you're not going to have to go to the doctor and order your test, ask him to order your test. It'll be cheap enough to wear some kind of a Fitbit that's constantly monitoring you and get a blood test, and it'll be more automated. It'll be cheaper. You'll be able to, you'll be able to have such a savings from the reduced cost of getting those services that you'll be able to pay Dr. Barry on like a 10 or 15 scale instead of that stupid, 3, 4, 5 number he's got to work with. That's where I think these things are going. So that's why I'm optimistic about the future. I can't emphasize this deflationary thing enough. What you want to focus on as individuals, though, is figuring out in your own life, how do you digitize? How do you digitize yourself more? The things that you do, or the things that you want. How do you get more of the electrons to get that same experience without having to have the physical things? And it doesn't mean that we all, we're never going to read printed books again, or we're not going to ride horses, or have saddles, or play acoustical guitars. I mean, it's not all about just being digital, but it's about using what you do, or what you like to do, and figuring out a way to supplement it with digitization. If you can go all digital, right? If you can go all digital, you'll make a fortune. But if you can apply just a little bit of automation or technology or robotics to what you do, planting greens, microgreens, John Dowey, there he is, the more he can automate his process, the better product he can create, the less time him and his wife have to physically work doing it, and he makes more money. Right? It's a good thing. You want to figure out how to digitize what you're doing. And I think the comparison of the guitars is a good one, so I put it up there. We want that analog guitar, we want the acoustics. There's certain sounds you're going to get from that you're never going to get from anything else. But over the years we've blended that into electric guitars and all kinds of synthesizers. We can still enjoy music even though it's digital, and in fact we probably all enjoy music a lot more because we have digital access to it. I got Leonardo da Vinci's picture up here because even though we're all going to have 3D printers and we can do all these amazing things, Leonardo could do more with a 3D printer than any of us could, right? If he had it, he didn't have one. But there will be Leonardo da Vinci's that have this stuff, that have access to CNC routers and digital printers and big data, and we'll be able to apply this because this is the entrepreneurship we talked about before. We're gonna make a lot of things cookie cutters with robotics and automation, but we need the human element. That's a whole part about what my book is written on. It's about the human element of it. We will not get displaced by robots and automation. A lot of people will, but we won't, right? Because we're entrepreneurs, we're thinkers, we're people that are going to create, and you always need that creation. As far as jobs of the future, if I had to pick one, if you got a smart kid that's 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, whatever, 20 years old, if they like computers, computer science, cybersecurity, that's where I'd go. If I was 18 today, I'd be studying cybersecurity. It's not going away. The criminals keep getting smarter. And because of that human element, right, the criminals are always going to outthink the system. There's going to be more and more hacks. Our lives are more and more tied to digitization. So physical security in the realm of cybersecurity is not going away anytime soon. And The other things up there on the top of the list are all computer science or computer engineering related. Big data, artificial intelligence, robotics, absolutely. And it doesn't matter whether you're the engineer that's smart enough to create all that, or the technician that knows how to fix it or install it, whatever aspect of it. Or if you're a nurse or a healthcare worker, you're not going to create that stuff, but you're going to use it to magnify your human abilities so you can see more patients or better serve your patients instead of having to spend 5 minutes with a patient. A doctor can maybe go back to spending 20 minutes or 30 or an hour with a patient because he can automate or digitize other things in his service. The big thing here for all of this, and again, even if you're not technical, it's about blending that analog and the digital. So, those that can integrate, whether you can integrate technology and make it more, make it work with analog things, or whether you can collaborate with other people or other technologies or people in other countries using social media. It's all about that integration and collaboration to make entrepreneurship. Now, let's talk about the relocation part. This is the tax rate, the proposed tax rate with the latest Democrat plans of how they want to have common prosperity. So this is a rate of all the states, from New York at the top to Wyoming on the bottom, for the highest tax rate with state and federal taxes. So it's over 66% in New York is where it's going to go to if they get this latest plan passed, down to Wyoming about 51%. So as I go on this presentation and talk about relocation, there's a million reasons, and Chris covered a lot of them, as to why you will or won't relocate. Maybe your family's where you're at. Maybe you were born there. Maybe you like the climate. We're all going to have different reasons for where we do and don't want to go, but there are definitely better places to live than others just from a tax rate alone, okay? But finances don't drive everything. I live in Utah, which I love. Somewhere on the list, where's up there? About 56% of my income goes to paying multiple taxes. I love Utah. By the way, it's horrible. Don't go there. You won't like it. Stay away. We don't need any more people. But I live in Utah, and 90 miles away is Wyoming. I could save 5% if I moved 90 miles from my house. My wife is not yet ready to move 90 miles. And I'm a financial guy. I calculated saving 5% on my income taxes versus losing half of what I own by divorcing my wife. And so I haven't moved yet. I'm thinking about changing my residence and whatever. Still, but anyway, I haven't moved. So we're all gonna choose different places. And again, I live in Utah. I love Utah. Some of you guys, if you're big gamblers and big alcohol drinkers and stuff, Utah may not be the place for you because it's hard to find those other entertainment sources, right? I don't do those things. I don't care. So everybody's going to have a place that's right for them, and that's where you want to go. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think the United States, though, is the best. Right? I'm not going to Panama. I'm not going to Costa Rica or any place. I think this United States has something for all of us if we're willing to look for it. And part of that looking is working on the grid. And we all want to live off grid. Sean Mills is my hero. When I move to Wyoming, I'm going to fly him in, and he's going to put together my solar system, if I can afford it after my wife divorces me. So I'm not opposed to living off-grid, but again, as a financial guy, I don't know of a way to really work off the grid. It's a hard life being totally self-sustainable on a homestead. Not for me. And I personally can live wherever I want, but I know most of you can't. Most of you are tied to some kind of a job or some kind of a physical thing you have to do. And so when you think about your strategic relocation and you want that 100 acres or whatever you want, that's fine. Live off grid. But start thinking hard about working on the grid, because, again, this grid is not going away. And it will be there when times are tough or when they're not, and you can profit from it. Again, production is the source of wealth. The reason I'm focusing on the grid is that a grid is made up of nodes. It's a network, and at least one or more of those nodes on any grid is the source of production, and it feeds other things in the network. We want to work on the grid because that's where the money is. Okay, so that's what we want to focus on. The other part about these nodes, as I talk about them, you're going to see that a lot of them are not located in the cities. So you can get out, but still benefit from the big city. Right? You can be in the world, but not of the world. So just a simple analysis. Let's think about a power plant, an industrial base. Those are nodes on the grid. The city, way over here, just about any city in America, whether it's a big or small city, it probably has some kind of industry on the outskirts of it, and then oftentimes beyond that is a power plant. These are your production nodes, and they're sourcing and supplying the city with whatever, power, services, whatever that network is made up of. If there's an EMP and everything gets destroyed or whatever, the biggest city, the electrical system gets down, and I have to bring up my battery-operated ham radio and all that. It's still fine. The biggest cities with the most wealth are going to get those power plants back up, right? One way or another. They're either all going to die or they're going to get that up. So that's going to be priority number one, right? That is not going down, or none of this exists. So all the oligarchs will do whatever they can to get that up. Telemedicine, 7 years ago, you couldn't have done anything. You'd have gone to jail for doing telemedicine, wouldn't you? COVID comes out. Oh my goodness, everybody's got the flu. You can talk to your doctor on Zoom, right? They change the rules and the laws, and they make things work. So I'm not worried about electromagnetic pulses and things going down. But I'm going to focus on making my money off of these nodes on the grid. Because if I'm living way out here and somehow making money off of that power plant, whether I work there as an employee, whether I'm an entrepreneur and I sell them a service, whether I contract with them, whether I grow organic food and sell it to the people that eat lunch out there. Doesn't matter how you're making money. I'm not here to tell you about that part of it. I'm just saying, focus on these production nodes because they are not going down. You can have all the full benefits of Chicago or New York or LA or whatever without any of the headaches because you're living on the other side of that grid. So you can be way out in the middle of nowhere where real estate is still cheap and you can have a good income by focusing on these nodes. So again, you all have different preferences and abilities and desires. I don't know what the node is for you, but I threw up a couple examples that I could think of. The power plants, the industry, the hospitals, airports. We don't think a lot necessarily about railroads, but they're out there. I mean, there's a lot of income still produced by people working or supporting the railroads. Pipelines, national laboratories, universities. There's oftentimes you'll find these nodes are all located outside of major metropolitan areas. Some of them in the middle of nowhere, right? You can still make a six-figure plus income affiliated with those somehow without having to live in the city, without the expenses of living in the city, without the security problems. One example, the Mayo Clinic, world-renowned hospital, medical institution. It's in Rochester, Minnesota. This is a beautiful area. Anyone ever been to that part of Minnesota? Beautiful place, right? Beautiful place. You could live there, you could live down here even in Iowa and commute in somehow. Not be anywhere near the big cities and still have a fantastic life by somehow deriving your income out of the Mayo Institute, the Mayo Clinic. And you don't have to be a doctor, right? The fact is that there's all these doctors there and research people and all their support staff. So it's like a little community in the middle of nowhere. The Mayo Clinic contributes 4% to Minnesota's GDP. And this is a little teeny town. This is a little bitty place. If you're somehow tied to that, and again, you don't have to be in the medical business. You think those doctors' kids want to learn piano lessons, right? You could teach them piano. Do you think they want to eat maybe organic produce? You could grow them produce.
Mercedes-Benz dealership.
Yeah, are you a diesel mechanic? Can you work on a Mercedes-Benz? These are all things that you can do without necessarily working at the Mayo Clinic. But it's almost a $10 billion impact to that little bitty community right there. And it's a beautiful part of the country. I didn't make my slide before, but I talked about to somebody here recently, Fayetteville, where Walmart's based. Fayetteville, Arkansas, right in the middle of nowhere. I haven't been there for decades, but I remember when I was there 30 years ago. It's in the middle of nowhere, but man, it's a magnet for commerce because Walmart is headquartered there.
Titusville, Florida, from Space Coast.
Space, yeah, we're going to talk about that too in a minute here. All these places, they're all over the country. Elkhart. So if Mayo Clinic's too highfalutin, medical for you, Elkhart, Indiana, it's the world place to build RVs, right? It's kind of central part of the country. Labor's fairly inexpensive there. They can make a lot of products, ship in raw materials, ship it out to the Northeast. If you live anywhere around Elkhart, Indiana, you can still find really good farmland, and yet there's good paying jobs there. Typical manufacturing type stuff depends on your skill level, but somewhere between $30,000 and $100,000 would not be an unusual salary for either working at one of these facilities or some kind of support that supports them. If you're an entrepreneur, you can figure out how to do things with them. It's in a major transportation hub, which again, that's a node, a network all in itself. You're not that far from Chicago, so you could live anywhere around here, somehow derive your income from the RV industry, still sell things into Chicago. It's just about how creative you are and your ability to put these things together.
It gets really cold there, though.
It does get cold. Yeah, man. Rochester, Minnesota, the reason it's, keeps the riffraff out. That's why they like it up there so much. Mayo located to Rochester, Minnesota because he was tired of getting, he lived in the Mississippi area. He was tired of getting, what do you get when they get by the? Malaria. Tired of getting malaria. Left St. Louis and went to Rochester, Minnesota. That's how it all started 100-some years ago. I'm talking about big areas and specific things. We can broaden this out. GE, General Electric, just their wind turbine, the blades alone, where they make the blades. You can't ship those, right? You can't just easily ship a blade, so it's got to kind of be near where they're being used. GE has facilities all over the country, some of them really remote, where they make these blades. You're not going to ship those blades in from China for the most part, right? You can't do it. So you don't have overseas competition. It's a green energy that's going to be around in the future. GE is now a solid company all around the country. You can pick a location and strategically find it to put your homestead and work at a place like GE. Again, typical manufacturing job, 30 to 100 grand depending upon your skill levels. Field technicians that work even more remote, right, out on the actual wind farms, they're making as much as $46 an hour or more on the high end of things. So plenty of places to make money, living in the country, living rural, and still having a good income. So I talked about the Gulf Coast and Florida and things. This region has been the epicenter for international development for the last 10 years, okay? 90% of the oil is still coming from the Gulf area. What is coming from the fracking fields and stuff is still passing through here to get refined. Over the last 10 years, there's been more than $40 billion in development of putting in petrochemical type plants, processing centers. If you've been down there, you've just seen the boom, and it's not going away. We produce the lowest cost natural gas in the world, okay? This is about as close to the wellhead as you can get for that and still have a seaport where you can export it, because we export a lot of our natural gas. It's liquefied and we export it. So this region is one of the most economically fertile in the whole world, okay? And it's not changing because the stuff that's come here now, the stuff that's been coming here over the last 10 years is the first part of the supply chain. If you go back about in the 70s, that chart I showed you, when we stopped producing oil, stuff started going to Japan. Stuff started going to Germany. We get into the 90s, stuff starts moving more to other parts of Asia, Taiwan, places like that. By the time we get into 2000 and China gets admitted into the World Trade Organization, literally every little factory in the Midwest closed shop and went to China. Okay, this is all starting to come back, but we had to get the supply chain here first. We're making all these raw materials here now because the energy and the petrochemicals are here to make them. So whether you're talking about pharmaceuticals or fertilizer, industrial products, these are the seed grounds for all those things. Once these factories go in, then through robotics, you can start bringing back and turn the oil that gets turned to a petrochemical that can then be turned to plastic, and then the plastic can be machined or milled or injection molded into something else, right? So it's just one step in the supply chain. It is not going away. It's a trend that's going to continue. When you expand upon that, and I guess I didn't even say, I'm just talking about manufacturing. International shipping ports, commercial shipping, sports, recreation, aerospace, it's all in this area. You expand upon that and you get into the southeast. Over the last 30 years, has grown exponentially in terms of manufacturing, but again, in the last 10 to 5 years, the hotbed of where manufacturing is not only in the United States, but in the world, because we're building that tier 1 stuff around the Gulf Coast, and then it's moving up into lower cost labor and raw undeveloped land all across the southeast, so you don't have to shovel snow, favorable living conditions. We've got 16 automobile factories there, aerospace, research center, major corporations, Fortune 500 headquarter corporations, nearly 7,000 different manufacturing sites are now in that southeast corridor, and it's growing every day. It's going to expand even more. I don't have the other side of the map, but over here we have the Mississippi and the Midwest. We're literally the agricultural breadbasket of the world. We don't eat bread, but plenty of people in the world do. So that's fine, right? Because we don't care. We're not being in the world. We're just being part of it. That whole part is expanding as well because of the food, the water sources that are there. You know the song, God Bless America? Great song, misnamed. It's God Blessed America, right? Not God Bless America. God Bless America. It is blessed. I've been alive since John Kennedy was president. I don't remember him, right? I remember LBJ and everybody else. They were all, as Jack would say, ass clowns. Every one of them. Some were better than others, right? But they were all ass clowns. They couldn't screw this up, right? They tried, and the next guys will try again. We are just blessed to live in a country with so many resources and so many positive things. When you throw technology and the deflationary impact of reducing those fixed costs, it just makes it all better. And for people that are like-minded like us, we're not going to live in the big cities, right? We're not going to live in the heart of the metropolitan areas. There's plenty of free space where we can make money from the node, but we can live in freedom on our own terms. Again, I talked a lot about kind of maybe Rust Belt type manufacturing. Tesla, there's I think 5 Tesla facilities across the U.S. One here in Texas, right down by the Austin airport. They're putting in one. We've got a mega factory out in Nevada. Tesla's growing and expanding.
SpaceX.
Good paying jobs. So you got SpaceX, huge paying, quote, green or progressive jobs or whatever. They're all coming right along with the old rusty Rust Belt type jobs. The reshoring, again, just to show you how this is not changing, and a lot of this has been COVID related lately, but it was a trend that was happening anyways. There's more than $30 billion being invested in the Arizona desert to build Intel and Taiwan semiconductor factories. They'll be operational within 18 months. Okay, this was happening anyways, but it got expedited because of COVID and the supply chain disruptions and everything. $30 billion in desert land around Phoenix. It's going to be a huge economic impact. And again, you can live outside of those areas and still benefit from the resources. Just to show you how this is coming back. I was going to put up a slide. I have time to do it. Again, people doubt me when I say manufacturing coming back, right? It's necessarily manufacturing jobs, because a lot of it would be done with robotics, but manufacturing is coming back. If you don't believe me, what happened to Bitcoin mining in the last 9 months, right? Go back a year ago, I don't know. 80% of mining was done in China. Some huge number was done in China. Almost overnight, that moved out of China, and a big chunk of it came to North America.
We have a lot of Chinese coming here to put up their Bitcoin mining.
Absolutely, because energy's better here. Energy's cheaper. Regulatory rules are better. Government's better. And again, it's as bad as we may think it is. Okay, I've been to Beijing. I've been to Shanghai. I'm living here. Right? This is still a better place. Airports on the node as well, obviously, but international airports, they contribute over almost $1.5 trillion economic development to the country. Close to 12 million jobs are coming just from the big international airports. So huge money-making opportunities. And I threw up Nashville because I know Nicole's not within an hour or so of the airport. So you can still live way out in the holler potentially, or somewhere between the holler and the airport, and be deriving a good income by somehow figuring out how to benefit from this node. Plenty of open space. National laboratories. These are a hidden secret. When I was an industrial sales guy, I didn't really know what a national laboratory was until I started calling on them, but I ended up selling some products to these guys. These are hidden gems. Some of them in the middle of nowhere. Los Alamos, in the middle of nowhere. Up in Idaho, there's a atomic facility. But there are 17 national labs and then 6 other centers for Department of Energy development. They're all over the country. Again, some of them are in some pretty awesome areas, very remote. high-paying jobs, high skill level people there. So good opportunities. I won't dwell on the military bases because I know a lot of you guys are military, former military, but this is all the military installations across the country. They are everywhere, right? If you're retired military, you can maybe live near one of these and still do, PX privileges, maybe medical benefits, stuff like that. But even with just good paying jobs or being an entrepreneur, figuring out how to service the needs of these places, they're there. And we know the government is happy to spend and waste money. So there's plenty of places to make an opportunity of it. And you can live anywhere in between and still have the life, the freedom on your own terms. Let's wrap it all up and come back to the stock market. So I'm optimistic. This is why when you say, John, where's all your money? It's all in the stock market. Right? Most of my money is in the stock market. I believe in it. Everybody I talk to I get a lot of questions from Jack's show about the inevitable stock market crash. Inevitable. Right? I'm pulling out my money because of the inevitable stock market crash. There will be an inevitable stock market crash, right? Because they always come. I don't know when they are. But it may not be tomorrow. And you can still make money in the market because you're investing in the best companies in the world. Okay? Again, the U.S. isn't the greatest place in the world necessarily. We got a lot of problems, but we're the best house in a bad neighborhood type thing. There's still a lot of money to be made. When I hear about the inevitable stock market crash, and don't get me wrong, I pull my money out. I go, Jack's known me long enough, and probably why he knows me is because when I'm ready to go to cash, I get worried, I go to cash. I sell, I move out of stocks. I'm not going to sit through a downturn if I can get out of it. So and you can see there's multiple opportunities to get out of downturns. This is, the red line is the Great Recession housing bubble. The blue line is a dot-com bubble. So, we always peak out somewhere here and people start getting worried and eventually things fall apart. But rarely do they happen as quick as the COVID one did, right? COVID was in and out in a couple weeks. Usually they take months or years to resolve themselves. So you get a chance to get out and you get a chance to get back in. So I'm not worried about the inevitable stock market crash.
What's the x-axis? What are
This is days from the peak. So the dot-com bubble, dot-com bubble from the summer of summer of 2000, I extended that all the way out to terrorist attacks and the aftermath of that. That was a 628-day process from peak to trough. The thing about these is if you're the glass half empty people, you see that and get all worried and you sell at the bottom and you panic, right? But remember, there's the other side of that coin, the half full glass, where you got to remember that this is the run up. This is the aftermath. Okay, so I showed you the downward trend of the dot-com bubble culminating in the 9/11 attacks and stuff. Post 9/11, though, when everybody's worried about terrorism, when the economy's crap, when everybody's forgotten about the internet and all the efficiencies that are going to be coming right around the corner, right? Look what happened. For the next, and that was what, 300 and some days, 200 some days? For the next over 1,300 days, that market went up, on a 45-degree angle. Almost every week it was up for 4 years. You know what happened here, though? The housing market crashed. Once, you have the downside, but if you get back in, again, you didn't have to get out exactly at the top. You could have got back in at some point, and you ride it all the way back up to the housing market crash. Because there is an inevitable crash always coming. And if I put that housing market crash on there, once that fell apart, though, then we went back and we collapsed. The market came down 48% or whatever. And the green line, it worked its way up. And this is only to 2013. I personally think that's when that bull market ended. We picked up another one. But 1,500 days from the bottom to the top. It's a long time. The reason I'm standing here today is because I made money. I bought over here on both of those. Right? I didn't have to be a genius. Right? I'm not Warren Buffett. I just logically looked at things and assessed, made rational decisions. I was a Spock. Right? I made logical decisions about, everybody bought into the internet. They bought into all the hype, into companies that weren't making any money. It all fell apart, and the good guys survived. And so you buy them and you ride them up for the next 6 years, right? It's not rocket science. Okay, it's fairly simple. That's what happens, though. And I know right now we're saying, oh my goodness, Biden's in office, and if he dies, it's Kamala Harris and stopping the building of pipelines and raising our taxes and all these problems. You can still make money. Okay, this time last year, I talked about my COVID-90 stocks, essentially reopening stocks. A lot of people, they don't believe that, right? Because we were, Biden's coming in, he's going to shut down pipelines, blah, blah, blah. ExxonMobil's up 88%, right? Devon Energy up probably 150%. Biden can do all he wants to screw things up. Still, price is going to go up. And if you're invested in those things, you don't mind paying the extra money at the pump because you have it in your bank account. You're making the money as things go up. So last year, things are all, you could, I guess what I'm trying to the point I'm trying to make here is it's always a time to be pessimistic. There's always something bad happening. Last year, we could have listed a million reasons why you shouldn't buy stocks, why everything was going to fall apart. The Great Reset, right? There's always reasons. But those reopening stocks this last November are up probably about more than 55%. Depends on which category you're in. But without taking huge risk, you could be up like 55% from last year. That's because you're just riding this up. And now we're here now, and it's like, well, wow, this is another year. What's going to happen? It's up 55%, it means it's going to come down? Not necessarily. This is where we are today. This red chart is from COVID, the bottom of COVID, to 380 some days or whatever we are since the bottom of COVID. And look at that red chart. It's tracking pretty darn close to the last ones. Now, will it go another 3.5 years? I don't know. I get up every day and try and figure that out. I don't know. But there's a good chance that it could be as long as this one, or as long as this one, right? It's a long ramp there. So there's a lot of opportunity. You have to be, as much as you want to be prepared, Jack says when times get tough, or even if they don't. You got to be prepared for even when they don't. And there's a lot of reasons why that can keep going up. Where am I at on time? How am I doing on time?
About 15.
Okay, so 3 quick reasons why this could keep going up, right? And again, I could change my mind this afternoon. But for now, we're looking pretty good now. We got plenty of recovery going on. A lot of this recovery is not just the reopening, but we're reopening with less people, right? It's that automation. Most of the people you hear about on the news, all you hear about is wage inflation. Can't find workers, prices have to go up. That's all true. We are paying more for particular workers in particular sectors. However, if you look at who left the workforce over the last 18 months, it was primarily people 55 and older. Most of those guys are permanently retired now. They're not coming back. So really what you had was people on the high end of the pay scale retiring, and they're getting replaced by millennials. So even though the millennials maybe went from making $10 an hour to $18, they replaced a 55-year-old that was making $32 an hour, right? So from a company profit standpoint, and they're making about 60% of their expenses are wages. They have net lower wages because they've shuffled around the workforce. So from a corporate standpoint, it's not bad. They're making as much or more money. From an overall economic standpoint, it's also not that bad because the people that left the workforce, for the most part, have resources they wouldn't have left. They took early retirement, or they got afraid of COVID, or whatever they left, or a family member died and they inherited it. Right? We're going through the largest percentage of wealth transfer over the shortest period of time. Is what we've just seen since March of 2020, because all the elderly people died. A lot of those people had money, and they left it to their children and grandchildren. So that's another reason why a lot of people left the workforce. But with all those older people leaving, that meant that the millennials, and this is the second reason why I think this can go for a while, the millennials they're finally coming into their own. 6 years ago, they tell you, millennials, they don't want to own things. They want to drink Starbucks and ride Uber, and they don't want to own a house. They don't want to own a car. They don't live in the city. No. What happened? Again, COVID drove a lot of it, but it was going that way anyways. Millennials finally got to the point where they were old enough and mature enough where they were establishing households. They didn't want to live in Manhattan anymore. They wanted to move out to Long Island or whatever, move out to the suburbs, get married, have kids, buy a house with a yard. They need a car. All those things are adding on. That's Again, all good for the economy in terms of consumption. So that millennial trend is not ending, right? Because they're just hitting their 30s now, in the early 30s. That's going to continue because every year for the next 15 years, they keep going up that pay scale. So the other good news of that is the baby boomers are dying out. The millennials become a larger and larger. Not that I want millennials to die out or baby boomers to die out, but as the boomers go out, the boomer, that chart that we showed before with oil production, a lot of that inflation not only happened because the price of oil went up because our production went down, but because there were so many darn people on the earth that had never been here before, right? But at the end of World War II, world population was about 2 billion people. By the 1980s, it was up to nearly 7 billion, right? So that you had a 40-year period of time where you just quadrupled the size of the earth, or the people living on the earth. That drives a lot of inflation and a lot of cost creep and things. We're on the other side of that demographic curve now, where the baby boomers that have always affected every, they were the first ones to be in diapers, pamper kind of diapers, right? So that drove that market. Then they all went to elementary schools, so we had to build all these elementary schools. Then they all went to college, we had to build all these colleges. As they went through that pig going through the python, through the system, it took a long time, and they messed with economics the whole way through because they were such a huge cohort. Now they're dying and they're leaving off, and the good news for the United States is we have millennials. Okay, so we have a group of consumers that now they were never as large of the overall population when the baby boomers were at the max, because there were more baby boomers when the world was smaller with less people. So there's more numerical millennials than there are boomers. And every day when the boomers die off, there become proportionally more millennials. So they are going to drive our economy for 20, 30 years, just the way the baby boomers did. That's good from a stock market standpoint, from a consumption standpoint, if you're selling things to people, if you're creating services. So that's another reason I think this can go. And then the third reason this relates to the baby boomers is they have not lived through that, right? The boomers and Generation X's, you guys lived through the dot-com bubble, you lived through the housing crash, you lived through the Great Recession. For the millennials, it's all this, right? It's buy an NFT and it goes to the moon. Glenn, I have my go to the moon socks on, by the way. Glenn bought me go to the moon socks because I'm such a big Bitcoin proponent. Because I didn't buy it in 2015, I can't afford my own socks. That's right. Chris said, John, I wish I took Chris said, I wish I'd taken your advice in 2015 when you stood there. I said, yeah, I wish I would have taken my own advice. But listen, the millennials have not lived through a big major crash. They went through COVID where it lasted 3 weeks. So they think that everything they do is going to make money. And this is likely going to keep going and keep going. And when it falls off the cliff, it will hurt, and the douche coins, that stuff is going to drop 90. That stuff is going to drop 90%, right? The market will come down 50% or whatever, just like it did all over our lives. But you know what? That cycle will start all over again, and we'll be off to the races. So I'm ready for questions.
Okay, who has a question?